I really don't know how to describe it. It was like the turkeys mounted a counterattack. It was almost as if they were organized. As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
All right.
And on today's edition of Mr. Roy's Neighborhood.
Yeah, so today we are going to be doing some upgrades that I put off when I originally installed this lift kit. And if you've watched our other videos, you've seen us talk about it before. I did the base model Clayton Overland kit that just included front upper control arms, thinking, okay, it's cheap, I can get it on, and when it comes time to upgrade later, I can put on the parts that I didn't get with the folk kit. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of that today. And first off is the Clayton front lower control arms. These are a nice big, hefty wall control arm. They've got a nice bolt here to attach the brake line, except we've already cut off the bracket, so we're not going to use that. They are adjustable in length, and they're just got nice joints, and they will be a good upgrade to go on. One thing also I talked about before was I'm not getting quite as much down travel with my kit as Kenneth got with his. He opted for slightly longer shocks, and what I'm doing, what I did originally was I bought the recommended 2 to 3 inch lift kit shocks from Clayton just as a package, and so what I did was I ordered these slightly longer. They are the 3 to 4 inch shocks, I believe. They are the 985-24179. The shocks I have on now are the 177s. These are 1 inch longer, fully compressed, and about 2 inches longer, fully drooped. So we got the first lower control arm out. You can see that the Clayton one is substantially wider. You can also see I did scrape it a couple of times, the original one, out on the trails. But yeah, this is definitely wider, and I mean, this is not nearly as heavy. This is not only thicker, it's also heavier wall tubing, so it'll hold up a lot better. And so, since I'm not really changing anything about the lift except the arms, I'm going to go ahead and get them to the exact same length, and that just means that I'm going to run the bolts through, and hey, it happened to line up. And so by putting the bolts through like this, I know that this arm is exactly the same length as the arm that's coming out, and so it's not going to affect the alignment any. If I was doing a taller lift kit or something like that, I would probably adjust the length of these, and then it'd be much more important to go get an alignment done after. We do take advantage of Kenneth's lift quite a bit. For changing out just lower control arms, we're actually doing this with the Jeep on its tires on the ground, specifically because when weight is on the suspension and everything, when you undo one and only one control arm, it has a tendency to stay in place and not move, and that makes getting the new control arm in a lot easier, because once you lift up the vehicle, you take the weight off, everything moves around, and then you got to do the dance of tugging and pulling and swearing and having all that fun of trying to get a control arm back in. I have, as I've talked about before, I'm using the Grimm Offroad kit, and other people sell it as well. It's class 10.9 metric fasteners. These are 24 millimeter on either side. I don't remember what the factory fasteners are, and don't happen to have a 24 millimeter socket, in a shallow socket, but a 15/16 is so very close to 24 millimeter that it works. Got a funny angle.
That was interesting because we actually did see the vehicle shift slightly as the tension came off of that.
Where'd the nut drop? Where did it go? We'll find it.
So what we can do, because we are on the ground, if we shift the weight of the vehicle by rotating the tires slightly.
Oh. Yeah. It just comes right up.
We can take the pressure off the bolt.
Yeah. The only problem with using power tools on the front is that there are about 15 things in the way. So, I'm trying to get the tool here. Okay. Alright, and this side is a little easier than that side. That side has the axle disconnect skid that's in the way. This side, I mean, I've got my differential skid, but okay. Don't strip the head of the bolt you're trying to. Okay. And I'm just going to go verify the length here. Do the same. Alrighty. And so the bolt for the bracket, if you still have your factory bracket on your brake line, and you can see right here we've cut this one off just to give it a little more freedom of movement for travel, but they do provide the mounting point on this control arm, which is nice if you want it. But
the installation of the control arm is essentially the inverse of removal. It is a little easier to start on the front because it is the more difficult of the two to access.
Right.
So getting it in place and started, and then
and also I've added these Artec lower control arm skids that we welded on. You can see that in our other video. But you can see I've already hit them at least once or twice, and so getting this to slide up and in is difficult now. So we got to come in from behind to get it in the pocket.
right.
Okay. Now I need to come back just slightly.
Okay. So what I will do is just push slightly on the top of the tire.
Oh, actually, wiggle around a little bit. Okay. Yeah, come back a little bit. There we go, we're in. And see, that is so much nicer than having to, with it up in the air, having to really push and use ratchet straps and all sorts of other things. It's just a little wiggle and it goes right in. And I don't know if it matters which direction the bolt going through makes. I don't know if it really matters, but I put it back in the way the factory put it in. On this side, on the axle side, it does matter. You can only get the bolt in one direction, so you have to do that.
torque spec on these with the Grimm Offroad kit is 215 foot-pounds. Consequently, there's really no danger in over-torquing with the impact on this. The impact is just not that big. Okay.
And then, like I said, there's a little bit of frame in the way on this side, so the deep socket fits a little better. You might want to clean before you do this, if you're going to have your face underneath. But yeah, that's all there is to swapping out a lower control arm.
So the next step of this is going to be to replace the shocks. That's most easily done with the tires off the vehicle, just so they're not in your way. Just replacing the shock. So pull the lower shock bolt.
Trying to get the washer to come off. There it goes. Okay, and then, all right, so this is going to be under tension. If I use that, it's going to get stuck in there. So just try to get in here with a 18 millimeter. The fender liner gets in the way, makes it difficult to hit the power tool in. So, and this one is a factory fastener. It's one that's not replaced by the Grimm Offroad kit. And it's an 18 millimeter head.
Yeah, those are long bolts, as I recall.
Yep. Okay. Now, one important thing to note, and you want to pan down. All of this brake and wiring is between the shock and the spring, so when you put it back together, don't put it back the other way. But yeah, perfectly good shock, just a little too short. So you just try not to block your camera or your shadow. And I think it is a locking nut because it suddenly got tight and then it stays kind of some resistance, but doesn't get much tighter. So can you? Yeah, I can't get my hand around it, but okay, that's tight. And I am now remembering when we put the truss on, we ended up covering up the holes that this bracket mounts to. So on your Jeep, if you haven't put a truss on, you likely will have this bracket still attached, so you won't have to worry about remembering to keep the pieces in front of the shock. But yeah, so this one is just got that,
And just like that, we can see the additional length on these shocks.
oh yeah, quite a bit. I mean, may need an extra set of hands on this.
It's not quite wanting to drop in the hole. The deal is that when these are in the Jeep, there's a bolt that squeezes the metal up against the bushing, and so this becomes a little bit of a press fit.
Okay. There you go. Pain in the butt. But it worked. Now the key here because it doesn't quite feel right going back on, and it may just be that I've jammed up the threads. And so I'm just very carefully doing this just to make sure it's not just oil resistance. I do not want to cross thread these. That would be bad. Yeah, and it's going in okay. Doesn't feel like I'm having to apply any real pressure to it yet. And now it's, yeah, there it's reaching the locking part of the lock nut. So, yeah. I didn't cross thread it, I just got some. Okay. And then we'll have to look up torque specs on this. But, yep, he's back in. Okay. And then 74 foot-pounds. And normally I like to torque the nut because it gives it a little bit more accurate reading, but because the control arm's in the way, you can't get the bolt in the other direction, and you can't get the torque wrench on the nut. There. Once it stops moving between clicks, then you know you're set. Like I said, we cut this bracket mostly because you can see there just isn't enough length, especially now with the extra added droop of the longer shock. This gives me lots of extra play. This can just kind of sit in here. I might at some point come in and try to secure that a little bit, but it's okay where it is, doing what it's doing. But yeah, we're just at this point, now that everything's in, we got the new control arms, new shocks. You can see here the bump stop extension, which is essentially just a hockey puck with a hole through it, and then you just run this bolt, and that just keeps the truss and such from contacting on the oil pan or anything else. But yeah, that's what lets us get away with a slightly longer shock, because it's not going to compress as much, and so it's safe to run a slightly longer shock, and it gives me nearly 2 inches more of down travel, which is always good. Just taking an opportunity to come in and double check and make sure all my suspension pieces are still tight and everything's still, nothing's backing out. Everything looks good. Yeah.
Check the driver's side, make sure all of the cables and connectors and hoses.
Yeah, so here we have the locker cable. Again, it's not quite fully extended, and this is at full droop. We have nothing supporting the axle except the shocks and the control arms. So this is as far down as this is going to go. The vent hose, which, we forgot to put the clamp back on. We'll do that. And that's another thing. Always come back in and double check your work, because sometimes you see you miss something. Torquing to 215 foot-pounds. Now the stock spec is different. Oh, and I'm sliding a little bit.
Yeah, the stock spec on these is like,
it's like 140 foot-pounds plus 50 degrees, which tells me that they are torque to yield bolts or something like that.
something odd. With the Grimm Offroad, it's just a straight 215.
Yeah, because these are standard 10.9 grade metric fasteners. And it's
a job for a really big torque wrench.
Yeah. So last step, well, second to last step, still have to torque the tires down. I'm gonna set these jam nuts. And so really big crescent wrench. I'm sure somebody knows the exact nut size, but just a really big crescent wrench. And I'm sure there's a torque spec, but there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. Just now, one of the things that occurs to me, and it's the bane of basically every Jeep project, is that now that I have more suspension travel, you can see drive shaft droops a little more than it used to, And at a certain point, the CV joint on the transfer case side is not gonna live very long. So maybe before Easter Jeep Safari 23, we'll do a drive shaft install video of an upgraded drive shaft. There we go.